For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Joel Stevenson, the CEO of Yesware, a leader in sales productivity software. Prior to Yesware, Joel was the GM and founder of the Wayfair's B2B division, which he grew to several $100 million. Stay tuned for my conversation with Joel, where he shares some practical advice for entrepreneurs and business leaders.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
All right, Joel, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I have a lot of different entrepreneurs that come through on my show, and I speak with a lot of guys that have founded companies, and you have a very unique story of how you became an entrepreneur. Right now, you are the CEO of Yesware. So can you share a little bit of your journey of how you became the Yesware CEO and what was kind of that entrepreneurial journey like?
Yeah, it actually, I suppose I've always been interested in starting businesses, but, just through a combination of life happening, didn't end up actually doing it, but I've always sort of had the bug. And actually before I was at Yesware, I was at Wayfair for 7.5 years. And I joke that I only work at companies that rhyme. But Wayfair actually started there when we were CSN stores. And a lot of people know Wayfair as Wayfair, but maybe not as many people know that before we were that, we were this massive collection of microsites. So we had, I think at our peak, about 600, everything from futons to, all rooster decor, and I was responsible for 30 or so that had to do with home improvement or renovation. So think of it, sinks and lighting and, plumbing fixtures and tools, that type of stuff. And in those days, we weren't that huge. And so we would actually get copied on all the order confirmation emails that would come through the system and look through these. And because I had more of my history in more traditional B2B, and tech environments, I was always kind of wired to think this way, I suppose. And I just saw that, electrician shows up and buys 200 lights, or an interior designer shows up and buys a whole house full of stuff. And so it just occurred to me that there was a service model that we could deploy there for these types of customers that might yield better results than the standard Wayfair website experience, or at that time CSN stores experience. And so we started, I was able to coerce a couple of customer service reps to join me. We started cold calling people. And eventually, over a period of time, we sort of figured out this model of, better service, in some cases better pricing, but like one person for that professional to go to. And in many ways, we bridged a lot of the gaps that the website couldn't in those early days. And over time, we proved that we were able to get more revenue out of those customers than we were out of customers like them that were not managed. And so that we started to grow it and grow and grow it. And we sort of got it off the ground. I then actually had an opportunity to go run our UK business, wayfair.co.uk. And so I moved my family to London, and we did that for a couple of years. That was great. But then, my family was starting to need to go back to America for school and a whole variety of other reasons. So I then took a job in Wayfair's finance group, building out FP&A as we were going public. And that was a great learning experience. Though I also realized I was not really cut out to be a CFO, and that little side division that I had started grew and grew and grew. It was about 100 million at that point, but it had been scattered throughout Wayfair in terms of salespeople and category management and folks that were looking after the website experience, service. It was all disparate. And so the decision was made to try to consolidate that. And I raised my hand to be the person to try to do that and then to sort of drive it to the next leg up in growth. And so then we really started to invest in the thing. And in a couple of years, we took it from 100 to about 400 million in revenue. And now, many years later, I think it's about a $1.5 billion division of Wayfair. So that was pretty exciting. But eventually Wayfair just got a little bit big for me. I realized that I sort of liked the earlier stage stuff a little bit better, and being able to know more of the people that you work with and have a bigger impact in a smaller area. So I decided to take a little bit of time off, and we shared an investor at Yesware and Wayfair, Battery Ventures, and one of the ways that we were able to drive so much growth on this B2B business of Wayfair was a big investment in technology in terms of sales productivity. And so I started to get to know the space a little bit. We did a bunch of things that were really impactful to driving our business. And so I got to know the Yesware team a little bit and eventually decided that, I felt strongly enough about technology like that as a customer that it would actually be cool to go, kind of go back onto the pure tech side again and software again after a long hiatus and do that for a period. So that's sort of what landed me here.
So now you took on the CEO role at Yesware, and before that you were kind of the founder and CEO of the Wayfair B2B division.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Essentially. So obviously Yesware has been around for a while. Yesware, an entire sales enablement, sales engagement, technology sector that has just rapidly grown in the last probably 7-10 years. And you got some major players. But I remember way back in the day when we first started our business, it was ToutApp, and I tried ToutApp, and I also used Yesware way back in the day. So how has this sales enablement sector has evolved in the last 10 years or so?
Yeah, well, there's definitely been a lot of additional competitors that have come into the space. So, there's any number. I think about $1 billion of capital has been raised, at least that I'm aware of, in this space so far. And then, in addition to people that are just entering the space, you also have, the likes of Salesforce that has a tool. HubSpot bought a company and has a tool in this space. So there's no shortage of options in this space. I mean, in the like red ocean, blue ocean parlance, it's maroon at this point over here. I feel like, but it's a big market and there's a lot of opportunity. And so the players have started to separate themselves a little bit. And, I think one of the pressures that Yesware faced in its early days before I got here was, you think about Yesware and ToutApp, you put Cirrus Insights into that group where it was mostly about, email sends and templates. And then there was like the cadence, what I call the cadence first tools showed up, which were more like the sales offs and the outreaches. And, what ended up happening was the folks that were using Yesware for high volume outbound eventually recognized that there were other tools available that were maybe more geared towards that. And that's where a lot of the investment has gone into sort of building these like massive SDR, BDR teams. Think of it as like, boiler rooms of 20-year-olds that are sort of doing high volume outbound. And Yesware, because we always had a product-led approach, we had this whole, diaspora of different customers. And, when I got up, we were a little bit, when I sort of showed up, we were a little bit fragmented in terms of like, bigger, more traditional sales teams, but individuals, SDRs, BDRs, account executives, account managers, customer success people. And the users that loved us the most were more of the account executive types that were doing full cycle activities. And I think the reason for that is because we integrate deeply into the inbox. That's mostly the way that you experience Yesware is inside of the inbox. And so for people that are communicating inside the company, outside the company, the ability to integrate tightly into existing workflows versus you got another tab to go do your work that's complicated. And that makes sense if you're mostly communicating with the outside world. But if you're balanced, maybe not so much, or if you got a more complicated selling process. So that has started to happen. And so we ended up going into, I want to call it a period of more heavy tech investment in Yesware that we've gone through for the last few years to really try to make the solution as good as we could be for those types of users, so account managers and account executives. And we also had to make a big investment in the Outlook side of our business, which we had traditionally been a Gmail shop. We had some Outlook presence, but it wasn't particularly good. Now we actually have a very good Outlook product. So now we're starting to lean back into growth and getting aggressive again. But it took a while to sort of move from a pretty disparate set of customers to really deciding who we're going to serve and then, aggressively developing for that market.
Yeah, and so this SDR, the AE model that you described, which I know you mentioned Outreach and the Sales Loft and all those guys really go after, they seem to be going after the fast growth SaaS companies. They're the ones that technically adapts this whole divide and conquer side of a model. Mm-hmm. So is your customer base more like traditional enterprise organizations that have, they sell big ticket services or products and then they stick around with that same account for a very long time and maintain or grow those book of businesses? Is that kind of where your customer base then fall into?
Yeah, it's a mix. I mean, we coexist with those guys in some accounts where, the folks that are doing, either the account executives, account managers might use Yesware, and the SDRs might use another tool that's more built for that sort of thing. Part of it too is, I think, also a function of platform, because we were Gmail shop for so long exclusively. That tends to attract younger companies. I think if you looked and said, was your company founded less than 20 years ago, there's a decent chance you're on G Suite. If it was more than 20 years ago, there's a decent chance you're on Outlook. And also by industry, you're not going to see, there's probably not a lot of financial services firms running Gmail at this point, or medical companies, et cetera. So one of the things that we've seen happen as we have really developed our Outlook platform is we are actually now winning more of those traditional industries, and that's where we're seeing a really strong user fit versus the high velocity tech sales organizations is not. We have still some of those customers, but if it's really a churn and burn thing, like there are definitely better tools out there.
Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about this trend that we're seeing, right? Obviously, with the pandemic, right, there was an acceleration of inside sales that we saw happening in the last 2 years, because the traditional guys that actually went out and met the prospect, shook their hands, made a deal, that had to just completely, to evolve within a matter of a couple of months, because we figured out that's not going to be possible. So what have you seen in terms of the trend post, I don't think we're post-pandemic, but with that pandemic, how have you seen that trend change? And are you seeing more and more organizations just going straight in inside sales? And is that here to stay from what you can see?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's, I'll maybe talk about outside to inside, but then also the sort of the how people are accomplishing that. And from sort of a go-to-market approach, I saw somebody put together an interesting graph the other day, which basically showed these S curves of like inbound marketing, early and then sort of peaking, SDR, BDR, like growing really fast and peaking, and now product-led growth being the next sort of wave. And I think like part of the reason why product-led growth is compelling, particularly in this pandemic, is because, as you said, the last time, I think InsideSales.com did a study of this years ago, but they basically estimated there were 6 million non-retail salespeople in the U.S. And of the 6 million, it was about half and half in terms of inside sales and outside sales. Well, now obviously everybody's in inside sales, whether they want to be or not. And even post-pandemic, you could argue that even if sellers want to go back to being in person and companies want to sell that way, that buyers may not want to buy that way anymore, because now everyone's been sort of forced to reckon with the fact that you can get a lot done on Zoom and through, electronic or asynchronous communications in a lot of these deals, where it's not like you got to get, 10 people from the buying committee in a room for 3 hours and then have a steak dinner and all this stuff. I think that'll probably still happen in some cases, but that feels a bit anachronistic at this point. And so, as you look at, people starting to adapt into these markets, I felt like, SDR beta, that high volume outbound tactic was already getting saturated before COVID. And I think of it as a substitute for any other advertising channel. So and if you look at, we're obviously very good at digital advertising at Wayfair. And if you look at that progression, it's like all AdWords worked really great. And then everybody piles into AdWords. It doesn't work so great. Then Facebook's really great. And everybody piles in. And I think SDR, BDR is the exact same thing, because it's just another source of getting leads. And so if everybody starts piling into that approach, then all the prospects' email boxes start filling up, and then the spam filters get better because they've got more fodder, and and people start to get more numb to it starts whereas 5 years ago you might have be able to convince somebody that this message was really from you and you're really sincere. Now people are like, that's obviously campaign. So there's a certain resistance that the sort of the buying community is getting, and then on top of that, throw the pandemic, and whereas I remember the days when I used to prospect and it would be like, okay, I'm going to get into the switchboard and then I'm going to find this person's direct dial and I'm going to get past the gatekeeper and I'm going to keep calling them at 6 a.m. in the morning and wait until their voicemail changed. And I'll know that's when they get in the office. That's when I'm going to, there were, there's whole books written about these things. And so if you think about that world where you're on your phone and the call comes in, if it gets to your desk, maybe there's a decent chance you pick it up. You maybe have a little bit of caller ID, but you have very little information. Now compare that to now, you call my cell phone and I can probably see, more caller ID information. If you called a bunch of other people that didn't like it, you're probably flagged for spam already. And then if I'm still not sure, you're going to have to talk to Google, and you're going to have to explain to Google Assistant why you're calling, and I'm going to watch the transcript. And if it's really good, I might pick up. If it's really bad, then you might get flagged as spam. And now the fact that you were unsuccessful with me not only means that you weren't successful here, but now that actually inhibits your opportunity to be successful with the next person, which is we've never seen this before. And then you've got, other sorts of countermeasures at Apple, and others are putting up, privacy, GDPR. So our view is that it's going to be more important in the future to really nurture the leads that you have versus necessarily put more leads in the funnel, because all of these markets will be perfectly efficient. And if you want to drive more leads into your funnel, you're going to have to be able to pay more for that marginal lead than the next person can. And the only way you're going to do that is by, improving your product, by improving your sales process, by, figuring out other ways to sort of cross-sell, retention of your customer cohorts over time. So that's where we're really trying to invest more and more in helping people go from that first meeting to closed one versus the sort of no meetings to the first meeting, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So which tells me, I wonder, right? Because we also practice cold outreach, and we're also an inbound marketing agency, and we help build sales funnels and systems for our clients as well. And we're seeing this to be the trend in terms of the effectiveness of the cold outreach has dramatically dropped in the last 2 years. And I think part of it is what you said, the volume has gone up. Everybody just kind of went adapting the cold outreach, and people already became immune to this whole, sequences. They already expect to see the 7 touches before it stops. So they're not like, oh, I'm just going to wait until the 7 touches stops because I know that's when it actually stops, right? And then I've even seen guys that are getting very creative. Like they puts in the email like, "Hey, I plan to call you 11:30 a.m. on Thursday morning. Does that time work for you?" I'm like, "No, it doesn't work for me."
Right.
But yeah, so I think so you what you just mentioned is, so you're saying where Swear want to play is companies who already are generating leads. They already had meetings. How do you stay consistent with that prospect? Help them be more efficient in that from that first meeting to close, as opposed to trying to go super cold, trying to get that initial meeting, and you spend and burn all your email domains and emails, sequences, trying to get that initial meeting.
Yeah, that's right. We're not saying that prospecting is dead or that that's not important. We want to, have tools that help people prospect. I guess what we're saying is we're not necessarily trying to be the best at that. I suppose like the people that we expect will use Yesware for prospecting are going to take a more bespoke approach to it and have a little bit more sort of care and personalization in the approach versus like really a sort of a mass volume game. But where the bulk of our development efforts will be, it's like, so now you've got the first meeting with somebody. Well, let's make sure that these leads are precious. You don't lose it from like what I would call an unforced error. So you don't follow up in a timely way. That's an unforced error. You just actually forget to follow up, like would be an even worse unforced error. Or you follow up with, poorly written content, or, like you've got a peer that has figured out that when you send the white paper after the first meeting, you have a better chance of getting to the second meeting. So like, let's make sure that those best practices are there and used. And there's a system that can sort of, almost offload some of the work for the rep's brain so that they can really focus on asking good questions and doing good follow-up in the sort of the highest expression of sales, which is taking what a company can offer and trying to understand how that matches to, the business challenges and opportunities that another company has.
That's awesome to hear. So I think what you're basically saying is organizationally standardize the process and systems that's used to touch the prospect, how frequently, and making sure that, hey, with every inbound lead, you have to have this cadence that you follow. So for a fact, you're more likely to actually get that prospect to move to a conversation that leads to a deal. And then if you have a deal, have a set sequence of follow-up that's automated, or at least reminds you at a certain touch point, you have to touch this prospect. So making sure that the leads never go, the deal never get cold, and that you're closing. Because what you described, right? I think there's been a lot of studies on how many touches before you actually book a meeting, or how many follow-ups before you actually close a deal. I mean, sometimes something is like 15 touches or something before you could even book one meeting, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
And then if you're talking about deals, and I've heard, it's usually is in the, fortune is in the follow up, and most sales reps kind of gives up after the, initial couple of touches, and they're like, they're not responding. They went cold on me, moving on. But if you have a technology that enables you to stay top of mind with those prospects, adding value every touch point, and not just like, hey, I'm just following up. I'm just following up, right? Really adding value is the most important part, right? Drop a testimonial in an email, or drop a blog post or another resource or a case study, whatever those things are, that actually increases the likelihood of prospects saying, yeah, I'm getting value, and it's just not another email just following up on it.
That's well said. And, you guys are good at what you do. So you understand that, like, the days of just blasting people without something that is actually delivering value, I mean, those days are, I think, largely over. And so that's well said. And we believe that. I mean, you can think about another thing that often happens in selling processes is you get single threaded with somebody. And maybe that's fine in a more transactional sale, but if you're doing a bigger, more complicated sale where there's a buying committee, you've built a relationship with one person, now that person's gone, or that person moved, or, so the ability to, not only invest in that relationship, but make sure that you're investing in a broader set of relationships and answering this broader, more complicated set of problems. We see that as like, we want to build a system that, puts some structure, but you can't have too much structure because, you're going to end up with these side quests and all these other things. So it's got to be a somewhat flexible system that can sort of adapt to, what the selling process is throwing at the rep.
Makes sense. Now I'd like to get to know a little bit more about some of your personal side. So obviously personal development is super critical, especially if you're in the senior leadership role, right? You got to be always learning and improving your skills and things of that nature. So tell me a little bit about what you do in terms of investing into yourself to improve your personal skills and knowledge and your leadership abilities.
Yeah. Well, I mean, over time, I feel like I've read a good amount of business books. I don't know to what extent, I've retained, or it's hopefully in the subconscious somewhere. I'm not necessarily great about always quoting all the things or books that I've read over time, but that's been a pretty consistent investment over a longer period. I think more recently, the things that have been impactful for me are maybe more a little bit internally focused. So sitting meditation has been something that I've been increasingly doing that has paid some dividends. I've had an executive coach for a while, and I've sort of lucked into the greatest one, this guy, Jerry Colonna from Reboot. So like that has been really helpful to me in terms of, going from an executive in a company to being the CEO of a company. There were a set of things that, are different psychological phenomena, I suppose, or things you have to kind of grapple with that it took a while to, I suppose, to get comfortable with it. And a coach was really good for that. And then, the other thing that's been helpful for me is psychotherapy. And, the CEO jobs ends up being a pretty lonely job. So, the ability to go talk to somebody that's like really just there for you. And it's complementary to coaching, I think. But that's been great. And then I've been fortunate also to have a few different CEO peer groups that I've been involved with over time. And that's always been a great help to me, not only just from an esprit de corps type of angle, but also, somebody else that you can talk to about your business who's somewhat neutral, but has had a similar set of experiences. Those have all been really impactful for me.
Yeah. And I think, the peer groups are extremely important, because I think you are able to, because they're able to empathize with you and know what you're actually going through. And some, if they've gone before you, right, a couple of years or a couple of decades ahead of you, and their experiences are extremely valuable, right? Like I think that goes a long way in terms of kind of picking brain and trying to adapt some of the things that they have tried, which could save you, 10 years sometimes. Mm-hmm. So that's important as well. So obviously, most CEOs are big visionaries, right? They big picture, big idea. But oftentimes, especially I'm assuming in your case, you came into this company that already existed, took on this CEO role, right? So you had to kind of help, either kind of continue the vision that the company already had, or even kind of reimagine and come up with a new vision. Can you tell me a little bit about how you were able to kind of cast new vision and able to get the entire organization to kind of follow that?
We we had a pretty fragmented customer base when I showed up, and I think even one of our investors sort of they made the comment to me once, like it's not clear who we're trying to build for. So that was probably the first exercise, was to really try to nail down, like, who are we going to be the best in the world for? And obviously not our entire customer base is going to reflect that, but who is the middle of the bullseye for who we're trying to build for. That was really the first thing. And largely that decision was guided by just who loved us the most. And the people that loved us the most tended to be the account executives and the account managers, many times. And then sort of the other aspect of it was, where do we think we can, where do we have some advantages? And I felt like a lot of our advantages lied in our go-to-market engine. So, big top of the funnel, we have hundreds of thousands of uniques a month, product-led growth angle with a free trial, easy to use software. So that, sort of angle us a little bit more towards the, recommitting to product-led growth, towards more of a, an SME type of market. And, and then, once we sort of had that down and we started to get a little bit of success again, it starts to get into, now thinking about, okay, well, now we sort of know who we're going to serve. We know how we're going to serve them. Like, what do they want? And what do we think is the market going to need over time? And here I largely benefited from the fact that I've been the customer. I've been a salesperson, I've been a sales manager, I've built a sales organization, I've been in sales ops. Like, I've done all these jobs. And I've also had the benefit of sort of watching this technology evolve over time. And so it was a chance to sort of hear what our customers were saying to us, and then also take some of my own experiences. And, all these things end up being a guess. Like, no one can predict the future. And so, but we have a point of view that effectively says it's crazy for sales teams to try to run their org on like 10 different tools that are all stitched together. Like, you should really just have a tool that you use to run your business. And our view is that remote selling is here to stay, and that's going to be the dominant mode. And if you were to build a technology set of tools or platform to help a remote seller, it would not look like a CRM that's based on 30-year-old technology with a bunch of stuff bolted onto it. And so we're trying, that's where we're really trying to take things. And fundamentally the company was originally founded on the notion of, like, let's make salespeople's lives better. Like, there wasn't software for salespeople. The software was for sales managers and sales leadership. And that still guides us today, is like, what can we do to make the frontline seller and the frontline manager really successful in their jobs? So.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Sirius Decision. There was some study that was conducted. I think it was like, almost 3/4 of the time of a sales rep is wasted on activities that are just time-killing things, right? Post information into Salesforce or, Microsoft Dynamics and, put a note, put a follow-up task. But imagine if the tool like Yesware is able to enable them to do their job, almost like, not saying like they're not mentally there, but it just tells you when you wake up in the morning, hey, here's the 4 people that you got to follow up. Here's 7 touches that already been done on your behalf before you even opened your inbox.
Right.
That essentially enables the sales rep to do their job even more efficiently.
Yeah. Right. Like, just take all that time of stuff that can be automated, and there's no real detriment to automate again. So you can spend more time where you're going to add the most value. I mean, people talk about this, there's going to be, hundreds of thousands or millions of sales jobs lost to automation or, whatever. And I think, at some level that's true, but, if what you're doing today as a salesperson is processing paper and giving discounts, like, yeah, your job should be self-service automated. The Atlassians of the world have done a good job of proving some of that stuff out. But, if you're really acting in the true mode of a consultative salesperson, like, that's not going away anytime soon, I don't think.
Yeah. And I think people, you and I were talking at the beginning, how Wayfair has gone from being strongly an e-commerce company to now actually putting retail stores. So there is some validity to the fact that people still want human interaction. People still want to touch and feel and, talk to a human being, and not everything could be just completely seamless, transaction that happens. I know B2B organizations are trying to go that route to eliminate the sales rep from, being involved in every interaction, but I don't think it could be ever completely eliminated.
Yeah, I try to think of it as like, what's the highest and best use of a salesperson's time? And it's like, it's really coordinating the resources of one company to match what another company needs. And I think, if you really want to scale a big company efficiently, it's good to keep pushing the sales team up further and further up into that funnel if you can, and have software and code do a lot of the other stuff. But, there was I saw some stats the other day that basically showed that product-led growth companies at scale have the same percentage of sales staff as normal top-down enterprise. So it might start where you've got, you have maybe a fewer percentage of salespeople, but over time it equals out, because eventually you sort of hit the wall where, maybe product-led growth is great for getting people started, but okay, well now we're really going to get you into the platform, and you're really going to figure out like how you're going to drive a bunch of value out of this thing. And that's, we still need them.
Yeah, I think Salesforce, HubSpot went the route of the freemium model. When they did the freemium model, they have just more trials and more people just starting the software, but they're just not able to fully adapt the software. Mm-hmm. Now you really need a guy who looks at the engagement and the user metrics and say, hey, they started the trial, but they have no idea what the heck they're doing, and they're going to just drop off. So you need a sales rep to reach out and say, hey, let me show you how this application works, and what's your use case, and here's how you would want to use the software, right? Here's how you customize. Yeah. I think it doesn't matter product led or not. I think you're still going to need the human interaction for sure.
Yeah, and HubSpot's they did a great job pioneering a lot of that stuff, and I think they've probably they've written a lot about product qualified leads and putting the right CTAs in place. They've really done they're pioneers in a lot of that work.
Most certainly. So let's talk a little bit about decision making framework. I know you've talked you've helped Wayfair grow the B2B division of that company over $400 million, and you had to have made a lot of big decisions there. Obviously, at the S-Ware, being the CEO, you probably have a lot of big decisions to make. So is there like a decision-making framework that you follow when you have to make a very important decision?
The approach that I generally try to take is gather as much information as possible and try to have a robust debate about the merits of either side. And then, in the end, the decision has to be taken. And that's one of the things that, even I think is like a division head is a little bit, there's a set of corporate, you get benefit of like the overall corporate strategy and infrastructure and all these things. And so you're making big decisions, but it's almost maybe a little bit easier when you're the CEO and there is no backstop. You got to sort of figure out you got to make the call, otherwise the company gets frozen pretty quickly. So I'm a believer in really trying to stimulate debate and then trying to make a call. There was an interesting study that was done by Yale School of Management, which I'm partial to as an alumni.
Got your MBA.
Alumnus there. But they did some interesting work around the red team, blue team stuff. And we've sort of only done sort of informal versions of that, but there's some really interesting research that says that for really high stakes decisions, that red team, blue team is one of the best ways to go and make those types of decisions. So we've tinkered with some of that stuff. I find it really intriguing. It's something that I'd actually like to use more in the future.
Can you elaborate on that, the whole concept?
Yeah. So the idea is that you got a high stakes decision. What you end up doing is you sort of, split whoever's going to be in the decision making process, maybe your executive team, into two sides, and you try to do it, not necessarily randomly, but you try to do it in such a way that there's kind of an equal set of perspectives on either group, or the way people think is, somewhat evenly distributed. And then, the red team and the blue team go away, and the one team makes sort of the, just like in the old debate, the old like high school debates, like someone's sort of like the government, like the pro side, and then you've got the, sort of the rebuttal side of like, no, we shouldn't do this. And then sort of everybody prepares their case, then both sides present, and then you have a spirited debate about what both sides have just said, and then you try to make the decision. But that ability to have both teams work in isolation for a period to build their case is important to really try to strengthen both sides of the argument. Sometimes I guess our human bias is such that we confirmation bias and all these things that like you just end up gravitating to the stuff that you believed already before you showed up. And so this allows the counter argument to be strengthened before you can sort of squash it, if you will.
That sounds good. Yeah, I think something that probably we can try to adapt at our organization too, because I think sometimes when everybody kind of agrees on things, but you don't look at the cons of that decision, right? Because everybody kind of was on the same team. But I think going away and then just kind of looking at the overall challenge and deciding, okay, what are the pros, what are the cons, and then try to change each other's mind, essentially.
Yeah. Ray Dalio's got a nice way of putting this. I think he says in I think his Principles book, he says something to the effect of, when I was young, I used to think like, how could I be wrong? And as I get older, I used to think like, well, how do I know I'm right? And that led to better decision making for him.
That's awesome to hear. So one of the other key skill to have as a leader, right, is the ability to get things done, the execution. So what are some practical things that you do, just not have big picture strategy, but actually see them come to life? So are there things that you do to make that happen?
I mean, I'm a big believer in actually David Allen's getting things done framework. I think that's a tremendous way to organize your life. It's sort of like the goal you can never reach. I always like aspire to be, have this, the perfect, system that David Allen would be proud of. It never really quite makes it there, but I think it's an important first step. One job of the CEO is to make sure that things don't get bottlenecked, that things sort of make it to the rest of the organization. So to the extent that I have, a clogged inbox or, I'm not able to get things quickly to people, like I'm actually slowing the entire company down because I'm not able to get things moving fast enough. So that's a big one. We, for the company goals, we've been mostly using a system called Scaling Up. We adapt it somewhat, but we find that that's a good synthesis of quite a number of different sort of operational ways of making sure that, goals are clear and rules are followed. We've also done OKRs over the years, and we sort of, have an adapted version of the OKR framework as well. But I think like for an individual, GTD is great and is a huge investment to make early in your career. You reap the benefits of that throughout the rest of your career. And there's any number of good organizational frameworks, Scaling Up, the EO, people like, Traction, OKRs. There's a lot of good ones to pick from. I think the biggest thing is just to make sure that your goals are clear to everybody in the organization so that, you don't have to sort of tell everybody what to do. If you have the type of organization where you get a lot of smart, motivated people, hopefully they can see what the goals are and then try to, move their activities in concert with the company goals.
Yeah, that's like a dream come true, right? Having the motivated people that you don't necessarily have to drag to get to where you're trying to go. That's like a big dream come true for any leader. The last few questions that I have is about productivity. Obviously, the one thing we don't have enough of is time. So you have to find a way to be more efficient in getting things done, right? And so I'm sure Yesware helps a lot of salespeople to be extremely productive. But are there any productivity hacks that you have that helps you get, stay focused and get things done as well?
Yeah. Well, one that I've got an awesome person that helps me with her title is engagement manager, and we worked to give a shout out to the Mind Maven folks. We worked with them at sort of it's like a joint training program for both me and the engagement manager Steph for us to be able to work effectively together, and that has been a huge boon for my productivity as a CEO. I get way more done with her help than I would on my own. So that's like one the very sort of personal one. In terms of kind of general corporate productivity, we're big believers in tech and systems, and so we're huge users of Jira and all of the sort of the tools on the development side that make those processes more efficient. We're big Slack users. We've also got this the sort of this is more of a scaling up notion, but this idea that everybody's involved in a stand up every day. So all of the company is involved in some sort of a stand up every day, and so to the extent that things need to be figured out or talked about, or things don't blow up, having that type of a rhythm in the company is really good, because things show up, and so then we can make decisions and we just sort of move on. So those are a few.
Awesome. So knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would have started meditating earlier. That's one for sure. I've just found maybe part of it comes with age too, but like my ability to focus now is much better since I've started doing more sitting in particular is what I've noticed. And then I think there's something about patience and sort of sticking with an opportunity for an extended period of time before you really start to see the benefits of it. I think, Warren Buffett used to talk about this idea of like, you get handed a punch card, you get 20 punches over your life, and it's like, make them count. A lot of people might only get 5 to 7 punches. So it's like, really be discerning about where you choose to invest your time. And then when you make that choice, really give that sufficient effort and time to see the fruits of that labor over a period.
Yeah, I think Warren Buffett also kind of, preaches the whole concept of investor versus the trader mentality as well. He's all about investing and not trading, right? Because he buys a company, holds it, and that's it. And he doesn't look back and, question like, oh, should I trade that? Yeah. So right. Again, thank you, Joel. Appreciate you sparing this time with me and sharing some of your life lesson and obviously some of the advice that our entrepreneurial friends can take away. So thanks again for your time.
Yeah, great to be here. Enjoy the discussion.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.